Hi everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença, and today we're going to talk about build a fundraising smart contract of Web3 course of Freecodecamp. So basically in this project, we're going to create and deploy a smart contract for a blockchain that raises funds for our startup. So the goal is to raise 150 tokens before the 7th block is mined. Okay, so basically we're going to accept some donations from other people for our startup. And we're going to keep track of creating this smart contract. In this project, we're not going to build the whole logic for creating a blockchain. This is the goal for the previous project that we did. So if you didn't do this, you can check the playlist of Web3 in our channel and you will find it. As well, if you're not able to open up this setup, we also did a video explaining how can you set up your environment to start working with Web3. Okay, so let's start. Basically, we have a couple of files in here. We're not gonna work with multiple of them. We're only gonna work basically with this onTransactions.js, onNewBlock.js, and initialState.json. These are the only three files we're gonna work with. Basically, the initialState.json, we're gonna create here how it's gonna be our initial state for the smart contract. So we're gonna create this status open and some other properties that we need, and we're gonna add in the future. In our onTransactions, we will run this file will run immediately after a transaction is sent to the address of your contract, and the onNewBlock file will run immediately after a new block is mined. Okay, so we're gonna basically work with these three files. Before we read here the user stories and we run the tests, they're telling us to take a look here at the hints, because this will help us understand how a contract works. For example, in here we have in our folder example contract, and we have some files that we're gonna build. So here they have the OS transactions, and we're gonna do something like this. We have our onBlock.js as well as an example, and we're going to do something like this. And we have here the initial state that we are already seeing that this is the initial state for our smart contract. So let's say some things. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to do a node init blockchain to reinitialize the blockchain files. Okay, so first we're going to do node. Remember that your terminal should be inside of the build a fundraising smart contract, otherwise it won't work. And we're going to do node init blockchain to initialize.js to initialize our blockchain. So before we start, I'm gonna open up here our blockchain .json. And right now our blockchain is empty. Remember that blockchain is a list of blocks where we can keep track of the transactions. So once I click enter, it will create for us our Genesis block. The Genesis block is something that we saw in the previous project. That is normally the block that we have to hard code to initialize our blockchain. And it has hash 0 and previous hash null, because this previous hash null, this means that this is the first element of our list. This is the first block in our blockchain. Then once we do this, they are telling us to do node deploys contract, the name of our folder that is example contract, a private key of our wallet to deploy the example contract. It will add an address for it in contract wallets.json and add the contract to the contract pool. So now if we want to deploy a contract, we have to run this. So I'm going to do node deploy contract.js. Then they're telling us to get a private key in our wallet. In the previous project, we were building the wallets that we were creating for each user. But in here we already have it. So we're gonna get here the public key, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, the private key. They're telling us to get the private key. So I'm gonna get the private key of me, for example, and I'm gonna put in here. Then I think we need to add something before the private key. Yes. So before the private, we're going to do node deploy contract.js. We need to add the name of the folder here that it's example.contract. Then we need to add the private key. And finally, we can enter here. And we will check here this message. Your contract has been deployed at this address. So this is the address of our contract. Now, if we take a look at smart contracts in here, it will show for us that we have this contract. We have the address, the creator address, that is the private key, the functions that we have available for this contract, and these functions, if you take a look, it's a string of the function that we can use, all right? And we have the state here saying that this contract is open. Then we should run this node mine block to mine the next block and add the contract to the blockchain so we can keep track node mine block.js to keep track of the transactions that we're doing. So if we take a look right now in our transactions.json, where it is, here we have now the block keep track of the smart contract that we have. Okay, then this is pretty much what we need to do. Then we're gonna have this node add transaction to send a transaction to the contract. So every time we want to send, for example, if we want to send an amount for our startup, if we want to donate, we're gonna use this add transaction. So I'm gonna do in here node add transaction.js. Here we have to paste the private key and the contract address that I forgot and I removed, so I'm gonna copy here from our blockchain. We have to get this address to send the value that we want, and we can send here the amount of 0, for example. I'm gonna send 0, and here this is a message telling us that we were successful. So someone sent a transaction to example contract and it's running blah blah. So this way we are receiving some money for our startup. Then we can use this node run contract to see the current favorite number. So for example, if I do in here node run contract.js, the address that we have, and then we use the function get favorite number.js, we're gonna see here the number that we're using. The favorite number is 10, and we can update this favorite number if we run the same code, but instead of get, we're gonna do set, and we can add a different number. For example, if we add here favorite number.js and we send here the number 11, and it will update for 11. Okay, here for some reason I had a problem when I was spelling number 11, and now we have this favorite number. Okay, now we have it 11 instead of 10. So this is pretty much the commands we can do. Now that we have this in mind, we're able to start creating our smart contract. Now, let's see the user stories. So the initial state of your contract should have status set to open and description set to smart contract. Add as many other properties as you need to fulfill the goal of your contract. So to start, we're going to start working with this initial state.json. And in here, we're going to create the initial properties we need. In the future, we're going to add more, but right now we just need to add the status, and it will always start with open, and description, that we're always start with the word smart contract. I think we need only capitalized capital S. Okay, so smart contract. This is pretty much what we need. We can run the test in here to check that we're passing, and then that's it. This first test we're passing, great. Now we have to work with the second item. So your contract should have a get description.js. So we're gonna create this file. Let me create this file in our fundraising contract. So here, file, get description.js. And what are we gonna have in this file? Let me put this in here. This file uses console.log to print the description from the current state object of the contract like this. Here's the description of the fundraising contract description here. So basically we're gonna, every time we call this file get description, we're gonna give the description of the contract, okay? So to do this, we need to import some things. Do you see this other files.js? We can import some of those things for our goal. Basically, the contract state will store everything we have about the contract that we want. So we're gonna basically work with this function here. We can just copy this line and we're gonna paste in our code. And basically here we're getting the state of our smart contract, and we know that our smart contract is an object, all right? Here's our initial state, it's a dictionary. If we wanna get the description, we just need to access this key here, description, to get the value smart contract. So I'm gonna create a variable const description, and I'm gonna do contract state dot description, and this will give us the description of our code. Then we just need to do console.log, and we're going to display this message that they're telling us here. Since we want to put a description inside that will be a variable, we need to use backticks, okay? And here we can send the message here. Remember to write exactly like it is in here, otherwise you might not pass the test, okay? So here's the description of the fundraising, let me see the message, contract. And then colon, and to display the variable inside of this string, we use $, curly bracket. You see that right now it's in pink because we're going to display the value of this variable. So here you can say description, because this is the variable we created for storing this. All right, so we're finished with the second item. If we run the test, we will be able to see that this second test we're passing, okay? Now let's work with the third test. So before we move on, let's test, right? I don't think working only with the button will be enough. I want you to see what is going on. So we're gonna do the same steps. We're gonna initialize our blockchain.js. Then we're gonna deploy our contract. So node deploy contract fundraisingcontract.js. And here we're going to use the name of our folder, that is fundraising contract. Right now we're not working with example contract. So here, fundraising contract. Then we need to give the private key of our user. So here we go to wallet and we're going to get the private key of me, for example. And I'm going to paste in here and then we can click enter. And it will tell us that we created a new contract and this is the address of the contract. Okay. Then what we need to do, we're going to do node mine block to store this in our blockchain. Okay, and now we're gonna run the contract, okay, to check what is going on. So here I'm gonna do node run contract.js. I'm gonna paste the private key, and then we need to paste the address of our contract. So I'm gonna do here Ctrl+C, Command V. Okay, and then I'm gonna say get description because I want to check if this get description file is working. Get description.js. So if I click enter in here, it's telling us that we have a problem. Contract address. I think I'm not sending the correct address. Sorry, I know what is the problem. We're not gonna send the private key. We're only gonna send the address of the contract. So here node run contract.js, the address of our contract, get description.js. So when we do this, we're supposed to say smart contract, and this is what we just did. We're doing this console.log. Here's the description of fundraising contract, smart contract. Now we're gonna build the update function. So if we take a look in here, your contract should have an update description.js file that updates the description variable is stored in the contract state to whatever argument is passed to. So basically, we're gonna run this same code again, but instead of get description, we're gonna have our update description, and we're gonna send in the end the message we want to send in our description. For example, new description. If you think about arg, this will be our only element we're sending when we're running our code. So we need to get this element from our command line argument. Okay. So here we're gonna create a new function, a new file actually, update description.js. All right, and then we're gonna use these other files to get some things that we need. So to do this in other files, I'm gonna copy this contract state because we're gonna change the state of our contract. So we need to keep track of this file. I'm gonna use this args to get the arguments from the command line. Okay. So I'm gonna paste in here. And I'm also gonna copy this first line because this first line contains one function that we will use. If you read in here, we have this function update contract state. And we're gonna see in the future how it works, but this will be pretty good for us. Okay, so what are we gonna do? First, we're gonna update the value of our description with this element that we have here in the terminal. So I'm gonna do contract state.description. Remember, if you want to overwrite what was in the value of this key pair description, you just do contract.description and you overwrite with the new value you want. In this case, we want to overwrite with a value of something that we're sending in the command line. So we can use args, that it's a variable we already got, and we want to get the first element. Okay? Then, once we have this in our hands, we want to update the contract state. So if you take a look at blockchain helpers, here they already created some functions that we're going to use, and we have in here, if you search for update contract state, basically this update contract state will update the contract, the properties we have in our contract, and we have to send the address of this contract and the new state. So basically I'm going to do here update contract state, and the address we're gonna get by this contract. Actually, I didn't get the address. We're gonna use these other files. Here we have this variable const contract address. We're gonna use this to help us. So I'm gonna paste this variable and I'm gonna use here contract address. And the new state, it's our contract state because we are overwriting in that one. Okay, and this is pretty much what we need. Now if we run our code, let's see. I made a mistake in here. It's okay. Let's run again. So here we have update description.js. And we want to overwrite with description. And when I run, it's telling us that we don't have update description. Let me see if I made a mistake when I was running here. So I'm gonna go here in our blockchain. I'm gonna get the address of the contract. I'm gonna do node run contract.js. The contract address, update description.js, and the new description that I want to overwrite. Let's see if we're able to run. Now we have this function update description on contract address not found. Let's see what is going on. This update description is in here. I think we forgot to use quotation mark in here, and this will probably fix. No, it's not accepting. Let me double check in here to see what's going on. So I saw here what was going on. Basically, we need to run node init blockchain again, node deploy contract, node mine block, and then we're able to update. Because once we did the block, this smart contract by that time, we didn't have the function get update description.js. That's why we were having an issue. But right now, if I click here, if I run contract and I use update description and I try to change here to new description, take a look at line 24. If I click enter, it will overwrite here. It's supposed to overwrite actually. Let's see what is going on. And if I do node mine block.js, we're supposed to see here the new description. Okay, so we need to do the change and we need to start in our node mine block.js. So this update function is working, and if we run the test, we will see that it's actually working. Okay, so far we're just creating these functions. Now soon we pass this item 3 and 4. That's great, it's passing. We're gonna work right now with the other one. So let's see if we pass to the test 5. So like we can see in here, we passed the test so far, and we need to continue working with the other one. So we're almost finishing. Now we need to keep track of the transactions that we are receiving from the donations. And basically here in the user stories, they're telling us that if enough funds the fourth item. If enough funds are sent to the contract address to meet 150 token goal before the 7th block is mined, your contract creates a transaction that sends all the fund raised from the contract to the address of the contract creator. So right now, before we start, we need to make our initial state even better to keep track of the transactions and how many tokens we have raised. So basically, we're going to create here a transactions, and transactions will be an empty array, all right? And we have the raised, and here we're going to store the number 0 because we're always going to start with 0 tokens, all right? This is the first change. Now we're going to work with our own transactions.js to get the money that we are receiving, update our transaction, and then we need to check if we reach 150 token to send the money to the contract creator. So what are we going to do? First, we're going to add the new transaction we are receiving in the end of our transactions list. Okay, so we're going to get the transaction that comes in, and we're going to push to the end. Like you'll remember from the previous project, every time we're adding a transaction at the end of the list, we use push. So we know that transaction will be a property of our contract state. So we're going to do contract state dot transactions. So this way we can get this particular list, and we're gonna add the transaction that we're receiving. So we're gonna do the push, and we're gonna add the transaction that we're doing. So this is our first step. Then we need to change the amount of money that we are receiving as well. So we're gonna add the amount of money that we are receiving in our raised part. So here we're gonna do, remember, raise is a property of our object. So we're gonna access this property, contract state dot raised. And how can we update? We're gonna get the previous value of contract state, and we're gonna add to the amount that we are receiving. In this case, the amount we can get from the transaction. Basically, the transaction, this is the structure of a transaction. We have the from address, the to address, and the amount. So we're gonna get specifically the amount of our transaction. So we're gonna do transaction dot amount. Okay, so this way we are adding 50, for example, in our raised. Once we do this, we're gonna update our contract state. Okay, so we're gonna do update contract state. And basically, if we take a look at our blockchain helpers, every time we're updating our state, we need to use the address. So address, we have this contract address, and the contract state we have in here. Okay, so this is pretty much what we need to keep track of the transactions. But we need to check if we meet the criteria here, if we have at least 150 tokens, that it's our goal. So to do this, we're going to do an if statement before we update. So we're going to do if, and how can we check 150 tokens? Again, we're going to check how much tokens we have in our raised property. So if contract state dot raised is greater or equal to 150, we're gonna close our contract. And how can we close our contract? We're gonna change the status here to closed. If you see closed here, it should be in lowercase, otherwise this might give you a bug. So here, contract state dot status, it's equals to closed. All right. And then after this, if you take a look in here in item 8, the final state object of your contract should have status close and description property set smart contract raised to fund blah blah blah. So here we're gonna change the description. So contract state dot description, and we're gonna say smart contract to raise funds to raise funds for my startup and the period. Remember, if you don't have exactly this phrase, you might not pass the test. Before we do this, we need to add the transaction, okay? So how are we gonna add the transaction? We're gonna use here this blockchain helpers. If we search for add transaction, we're gonna use this function. Basically, this function, we need to send where it is. In this function, we need to send the private key of the user, the address, the true address, that it's basically the contract address, and the amount, okay? So here we're gonna use add transaction function. And here we need to use the private key, because why are we using this add transaction? We're gonna send all the tokens to the creator of the contract. Okay, let's keep this in mind. So we need the private key, the creator address, and we need to send the amount of money we want to send. So here we're gonna get all the money we have in our contract state. So contract state dot raise it, okay? And this way we're sending the data, all the transactions to our user. And then we update the status, the description, and then we can call the update contract state by the end of doing this if condition, and we already update everything at the same time. Okay, so let's test. To test, we need to run all these commands again. So node init blockchain.js. Let me close this one in here. Great, so we're initializing our blockchain. Then we need to run deploy contract, and I'm using here a private key, so we are deploying contract in here. Great. Then how can we check this? Let me just see here in my notes. We're going to do a node mine block.js to update our blockchain. And right now we have here the smart contract and we have 0 and transactions, it's empty. Okay. Then we're gonna add a transaction to check if it's working. So if I do node add transaction, actually, I'm gonna do another node mine block because I want to give some money for my user. Let me see. Here, I'm giving some money to this user. Let's see, 04112 is this user here. Now I'm gonna do node add transaction. And for this node add transaction.js, we need the private key of the user. I'm gonna paste here let me see. This is the address of our contract, but before the address of our contract, we need to give the private key of the user. And in my case, the user that I want to give is this one. Private key will be this one, because he has some amount of money. And in the end, I'm gonna give 50 because we know that this user has 50 tokens. And let's see what happens. So if I do here 50, we didn't have any message, so this means that it was okay because we gave 50. And then we need to check our transactions.json, and we will see that our user gave some money for our startup. And we can also check their smart contract.json, because in this case, let me open up. We will see this value with us. And here we have the status is open smart contract, and we have this object 50. Let's see, here there's something that is not correct, because here it should be .raised, not only smart contract state. So let's run everything again. Node init blockchain, then we're gonna run deploy contract for that particular user, node mine block. I'm gonna do again a node mine block. Oops, I did everything wrong. Node mine block one more time. I'm gonna copy this address to run the transaction. So I'm gonna copy this address. Oops. And we're gonna do node add transaction.js. I'm gonna put the private key. I'm just gonna store in here. Let me copy the private key of the wallet. Let's see in our blockchain who has money. Again, the same user has money, so we're gonna copy in here. We're gonna paste. Then you're gonna paste the address. And where did I store this? In our smart contract. So let me cut this. Great. I'm gonna add in here, and I'm gonna give 50. Once we run this, right now we're giving the raised object like it should. I didn't save the file, but it should give us the correct thing if you run this again. Okay, so this first step is done. Now we need to work with creating the new block, and then we just need to fill in our project. So like we can see in here, we passed this test, and I run it again, and now it's working because I saved the file, and here we're receiving 50. Okay, now we need to work with the final thing, that is creating a new block. So basically, when we're creating a new block in here, they're telling us if enough funds are not raised to meet 150 token goal before the 7th block is mined, your contact create transactions to send all the funds back to the addresses that donated them. So basically, if we don't reach 150 tokens till our 7th block, we're gonna return the donations for the users. Okay, so to do this, we're gonna start with an if statement to check what is the length of our blockchain, and here we can get by using this variable blockchain length that is giving this for us. So if blockchain length is greater are equals to 7, and we need to check if this this contract state is open. All right, actually we're only gonna check this if statement if it's not closed. So here we can do an AND operator. Contract state dot status is different than closed with the letter D. So if the length of the blockchain is greater than 7 and our contract is open, we're gonna return the values for the donators. Okay, so how are we going to do this? We're going to do a loop on all the transactions we have in our state. Transactions. Remember that this is I miswrote transactions. Remember that this is a list, so we can do a for each loop. For each. Here I'm going to say transaction. So for each iteration, we're going to work with one particular transaction. And what we want to do, we want to use the add transaction to give back the money. So here, add transaction. And we need to send the private key. Then we need to send the address of the creator. And here we're not going to use creator address. We're going to use if you take a look at the transaction, let's take a look in here. We're going to use this to address. Actually, this from address, because this is where this is the address of people who donate for us. So here we're going to use transaction dot from address, and then we need to send the amount of money we want to send. And we're going to send exactly the amount of money that this user gave to us. So we're going to use transaction dot amount. So once we update this, this is our if statement, our for loop. After we finish our for loop, we're gonna change the state, contract state status. We're gonna make it closed. Okay, and we're gonna change the description for the same description we have in here. So I'm gonna copy this description. And in the end, we're gonna do this const update. So you can copy both of them and you can paste. This is pretty much what we need to do. All right, so let's test and check if it's working. I'm gonna initialize everything over again. So node init blockchain.js, and our blockchain is empty. I'm gonna let this open so we can check what is going on. Now we're gonna do node deploy contract, fundraising contract, and a private key. All right, so now we created this block for us. Now I'm gonna do node mine block.js to store this in here. It's open and it's raised 0. I'm gonna give another node mine block to give more money for our user, and the user that received some money is what is the user? Any user received. Let's do again a mine block to give some amount for this user. So here we have this 0.16. So basically this one received. So we know that I received 100 tokens, right? And I'm gonna do another node mine block to give money for another person. And this person received again. So now we're gonna add transaction. Let me store this in here. Let me copy the address, and we're gonna add a transaction. I'm gonna store this in here. But don't worry, I will remove just to clear my terminal. So now node add transaction.js. We're gonna copy the private key of the user that has 150 tokens. That is this one, private key. And if we paste, great. Now I'm gonna cut the address of the contract and put in here. And I'm gonna give the number 50 because we wanna add 50 tokens. We were successful. Then I'm gonna add again, let's see if this is a story. So here we have raised 50. I'm gonna add more 50, and now we have 100. And I'm gonna add more 50 in here, and we're gonna have 150. Okay, now I'm gonna do a node mine to store this in our blockchain. So node mine block.js. And right now, it will change the status to close, I believe. Here it's storing all the transactions, and in the end we have here raise 150, and it's closed, and we have the description, smart contract to raise funds for my startup. And I'm gonna do one more node mine block.js just to be sure, because in our tests we need to have 6 blocks. Okay, so I wanna pass all the tests in this case. And let's check now if we run the test, if we're passing everything in here. So I made a mistake in here. I said, but I forgot to add this contract state.status equals to closed. And once I did it, I ran init blockchain again, deploy contract. I did the node mine block 6 times, 5 times actually. I did the node add transaction 3 times, and then finally the node mine block.js. And when I run the test, I pass everything. So this is pretty much what we have for this project. If you enjoyed this content, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, send here in the comment. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye. If you would like to have full support from Programming Expert via Telegram group and group coaching, check the description below.